Honourable Member for Elmwood Transcona, Mr. Blaikie.
Hello, thank you very much. You know, Mr. Speaker, when this crisis began, I think there was a pretty clear choice ahead of the government, which was whether they would take a suite of measures to shore up the status quo, providing some income replacement to people who had lost their regular income, or whether they would recognize that there were a whole group of people getting left behind by the status quo, who were also going to face increased difficulty coming through this crisis, and therefore provide a universal income support that covers everybody and makes sure that there were no cracks for people to fall through. There's been a number of iterations of different programs, and we spent a lot of time trying to identify those cracks and negotiate with government to get them to fill them. But one significant or a couple significant groups of people who continue to fall through the cracks and are by no means the only ones are seniors and people with living with disabilities. Their income may not have been cut, but it wasn't great before, and they faced increased costs like additional dispensing fees, grocery delivery fees, in some cases having to pay to have people do their laundry. There's been a number of costs for vulnerable populations that haven't been met with any direct financial assistance by government. So beyond the one-time increase in the GST rebate, what is the government's plan for seniors and for people living with disabilities so that they get direct financial assistance to help them weather the crisis?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, this is an unprecedented crisis that we needed to move extremely quickly on. But we took a moment and to reflect and to look at how we could best help people.
Mr. Speaker, we can't hear him if you're listening to English.
Okay, we have another point of order. We're having a technical issue. I just want to pause for a second. Ms. Vecchio, the issue is you're not hearing because on the English.
Yes, correct. I'm currently on the English version and I cannot hear the Prime Minister at this time.
Okay, if you don't mind, we'll just push pause for a second and we'll see if we can fix that from this end.
Mr. Speaker, I am up too also on the English and I can hear him and I'm on the English.
I see a lot of head.
Mr. Prime Minister, I've switched my language to English. I was on floor, but perhaps if I speak in English, people can hear me. Ms. Vecchio, can you hear me now?
She can. I saw her give the thumbs up. I'll let you continue.
Thank you. From the beginning, we knew that we were going to have to help millions of Canadians who we were asking to stop working, to stay home because of COVID-19. That's why we moved very quickly with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit that would be an income replacement for people who lost the paychecks. The first and biggest challenge was to make sure that people were counting on a paycheck that would come in to help them pay their rent, to pay groceries, and were relying on that paycheck that suddenly disappeared would get the support they needed. And that's why we moved quickly on that. We knew that targeted measures were the best way to help people, including the most vulnerable. It was not going to be worthwhile to send checks to people who continue to make salaries, who have paychecks coming in, who don't need the help. We much prefer to focus on those people who need it.
If I may ask, then so what are the targeted?
We move forward on targeted measures for people in replacing those paychecks. We then recognized that students, for example, were expecting to be able to start work in May, in many cases as post-secondary students. So we put forward a program for them just last week. We recognize as well that seniors and people with disabilities and other folks have been facing extra challenges that we are responding to, that we are putting forward support for. We've done a number of things for the most vulnerable seniors already, and we will continue to put forward more measures as well.
So can Canadian seniors expect your government to be announcing direct financial assistance sometime in the very near future?
We are working on getting the support for seniors that they need. There are many seniors who are particularly vulnerable because of COVID-19, not just on a health basis, but because of increased costs, because of challenges around isolation, because of loss of income or portfolio, because of the stock market challenges. We are going to continue to help everyone who needs help as best we can as a government in the days and weeks to come.
I think at this
Mr.
point, they would
Blaikie,
be
we have
more
about a minute left, so 30 seconds for the question, 30 seconds for the answer. And I want to remind the honorable members that the question and the answer should be about the same length of time. That's a rule of thumb that we use in the House during committees. So I just want to remind the people answering as well as the people asking the question. Mr. Blaikie, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Mr. May, please.
If you could remind questioners to direct the questions through you. It seems to be a lot of back and forth.
Yes, that's a good point. I was going to bring it up after before we start the next round, but please place your questions through the chair of the committee and not directly to the person you're speaking.
Mr. Chair, on that point of order as well.
Mr. Genuis.
Yes, with respect to Mr. May's point, it's just not a requirement of committee that members pose their questions through the chair. You've suggested we do it, and that's a legitimate suggestion, but it's not the convention of parliamentary committees, and this is a committee to require members to pose their questions through the chair. Thank you.
This is normally that's done through when you're asking witnesses. This is a little bit different. So in order to keep some form of discipline and some form of decorum, I would prefer that the questions be asked through the chair. Now, Mr. Blaikie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I humbly submit that at this point in the crisis, I think seniors and people living with disabilities would be more reassured by hearing a plan from the Prime Minister for how they're going to get financial assistance than a simple echoing of their concerns. When it comes to students, I just wonder, because the benefit proposed for students is so much lower and their needs aren't obviously any different now than anybody else's in terms of food and rent, I'm just wondering what if the Prime Minister could give an example of costs that students are exempt from that ordinary Canadians who need to eat and have a roof over their head, because I'm not aware of any.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister in 30 seconds or less, please.
Students in post-secondary education usually plan on working through May, June, July, and August so that they can pay for their tuition, so that they can support themselves through the year. That is a frame that many students across the country face. There are students who get support from parents. There are students who don't need to work, but most of them do. And that is something that is extremely important. And in this situation, we've seen that targeting students with specific support while also creating more summer jobs for them, more opportunities for them to serve their country, is exactly the kind of thing that will give them both the support they need to pay their rent, pay their groceries, but also contribute to their country at a historic time where we need the energy, dynamism, and forward-thinking approach that young people have to